All right. Round of applause, everybody. Nice to see you. Thank you very much. Oh, that was so nice. Thank you for coming to hang out with us. My name is Victor LaValle, and I'm going to be sort of starting the conversation between the four of us. Maybe I'll start with each of us just saying who we are, what we've written. My name is Victor LaValle. I wrote a novel called The Changeling most recently. I got another one coming out later this year called Lone Women. And that's it.
Okay. I'm Megan Giddings, and I've written 2 novels. The first one was Lakewood. It came out in 2020. And the second was The Woman Could Fly that came out in 2022.
Hey, everybody.
Oh, okay.
I got to say, we got the best time because we got the sunset coming down right behind y'all.
Magic hour.
I'm Maurice Carlos Ruffin. I'm an author from New Orleans, Louisiana. That's right, the sister city to this city. I have a novel that came out in 2019 called We Cast a Shadow. I have a book of short stories called The Ones Who Don't Say They Love You. And my third book's coming out next year. It's called The American Daughters, about a bunch of black ladies in 1850s New Orleans who are sabotaging the Confederates because they don't spy rings, so they're taking those guys out. So, thank you.
I'm S.A. Cosby. I'm the author of My Darkest Prayer, Blacktop Wasteland, Razorblade Tears, which was on Obama's summer reading list. I'm never gonna not say that. I'm gonna get pulled over speeding and sir, do you know how fast you're going? No, but I was on Obama's summer list. And I have a book coming out next year called All the Sinners Bleed. I also have a young adult novel that I wrote with Questlove called The Rhythm of Time that's also coming out. And in my spare time, I try to drink a lot of whiskey.
What kind of whiskey, though?
Oh, I love any kind in a bottle.
Okay.
That's good.
Okay, all right.
All right, so the name of our panel is Reimagining the Past and Going Black to the Future. So I'm going to focus on the imagining part of this conversation and talk a little bit about each of us has in some way or another in our work blended the speculative with the grounded, right? The real, the realistic. And so I just want us to begin by talking about just asking the question how or why do you do that? What does that add to the real, to add the speculative to it? Megan, why don't you start?
Thanks again for making sure that everything stays organized. And thanks, everybody, for coming out, especially the weather's been wild. We really appreciate you, and we appreciate everybody at Key West Literary Seminars for taking such good care of all of us. Thank you. All of that is to say, so I've written 2 novels now that have blended where I grew up, which is rural Michigan. What a time. I'll ask you all later where you're from, because you're very enthusiastic, unlike me. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about Michigan is it kind of primes you for wanting to think about both the future and the past simultaneously, because it's really set up in a way where you can be in southern Michigan, for example, especially Detroit or Ann Arbor, and you're in the present. You might even be in the future. And if you keep driving further and further up I-75, it feels like you're heading toward the past. And there's this sense of unreality that I think comes in that state that I think really primed me to be a fiction writer who would blend both the world we live in and also other places. And I think the other kind of deep pleasure, especially as someone who wrote a big part of her second novel during the pandemic, is when you're writing about the unreal and when you're going into the world of imagination, you get to forget everything. You can just have the pleasure of making, which it reaffirms you as a person. You get to make and you get to imagine and you get to play. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've always gravitated towards speculative fiction.
Nice.
I just want to say that one of my very best friends, when Lakewood came out, she would not stop talking about it till I read it. And then I read it and I couldn't stop talking about it until the next person read it. So you're...
Are you talking about Jamie?
No, I'm just kidding. So what I really want to say was this. To that point, there's something about the imagining part of this question. And I think that being from New Orleans, Louisiana, people have this idea about what the city is. Like they think that New Orleans is covered in rainbows, and it's like unicorns riding around, and it's like, you know, confetti coming out of bottles and that kind of stuff. And we do have that, because that's part of the show. Because being from that city, it's a service culture. You're trying to put on a show for people that come down to your city. We get into fights with people from the sort of other parts of the state because they're like, you guys are too full of debauchery and all that. But, you know, we say that, you know, nobody ever dreamed of like flying across the ocean to go to like Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They want to go to New Orleans, Louisiana. But the side effect of that is that if you're always kind of on, like putting a show on, right? People don't really know who the actual denizens of a city are. The fact that people are church going, you know, family loving, people, you know, cooking their own foods, owning properties for generations and passed them from mother to daughter to granddaughter. Those things are all a part of our stories. And so somebody may say, you know, Maurice, write me a story set in the French Quarter, you know, next to the Superdome, where people are like there during Mardi Gras and like having these sort of New Orleans experiences. What I really want to do is show the things that never get shown, because New York, you know, which is a wonderful city, I have people there, they have, you know, thousands of writers. We have dozens of writers in New Orleans. And so the difference is that we're all just trying to cover this space that's not being covered. It's like reporters in like almost a battlefield. So whenever I start a new project, a new book, I'm always thinking, what stories have not been told in the past? What revelations have not been revealed to people? And it helps that New Orleans is just such a fun place. So whether the story is, you know, light or dark or a horror story or this amazing literary story like what Megan does, it's just this idea of trying to give you a sense of what's really going on in a city that has so much fantasy covering it up that when you read my books, I hope you will go, oh, okay, so now I see why, you know, people make that joke about, I know where you got your shoes at, or I know who invented red beans and rice, or I know these little bits and parts about the city's history that make it authentic. And I think being in this space, I get a little nervous because everybody's so good at their jobs and they're so authentic. So this is not like just a me thing, this is an us thing. I can tell you that whether it's, you know, S.A. or Vic or Tayari or Jackie, everybody's doing these things to make the stories as authentic and honest as possible. And we're just like feeding off each other. I mean, it's like the Beatles and the Beach Boys and the Rolling Stones all operating at the exact same time and just throwing the ball back and forth. And every time I read somebody's book, like on this stage, I just get better and better and better. And I hope that I can push them also in their own ways. So what I'm imagining, I go to bed with no ideas, and then I dream all night long, and I wake up and I have a whole new raft of ideas I can bring forward into the world. But enough of that about me. How about you, Mr. Kyle?
I have a tattoo on my arm that says, writers tell lies to find the truth.
Whoa.
And I firmly believe that. I think, you know, Alan Moore said, you know, we're the myth makers. Mm-hmm. You know, we're the legend creators. And I think whether you write crime fiction, horror, literary, you're doing that in an effort to define and divine the truth of your situation, whether it's your personal truth or whether it's a larger sociological truth. And I think the best thing about that, the best part of that is it's fun. You get to make up everything. You know, many times people will ask me about stuff that happens in my books. Could somebody really jump backwards off of an overpass? No, hell no. But it doesn't matter because I'm going to make you buy into that. I'm going to create that suspension of disbelief. And so, and doing that, part of that, the magic of that is I'm bringing you into a world that you may not be aware of, a world that you may not know that much about, but it's still palatable to you. And so for me, you know, the best job in the world is being a writer because I get to make everything up. I don't, you know, that makes it hell on the copy editors, but for me it's just fun. And so, but it also helps me, it's cathartic for me on a personal level, and then also I think it helps people that read the books that can identify with the situation, the characters, and the places in it. But I definitely believe that. I think we use our imagination to find that truth, whatever it may be, whether it's, you know, good, bad, or ugly. Yeah. So, thank you.
Well, here's a question, a follow-up question to that.
Wait,
is,
what about you?
Well,
Hey, you can't get out of this, man.
He thought he was slick.
He was moving.
You did mention like New York has 1,000 writers, whatever like that. So the last book I wrote was a fairy tale, like a grim fairy tale set in New York City. And I admit, like, one of the things I was thinking about was like, how do I make this a New York City people don't know, right? Because what's also true about New York is people, it's like a best friend. So you become so familiar with them that you no longer see what's special about them, right? And you just see the same things again and again and again. And so for me, when I was writing The Changeling, the only thing I had in mind was like nothing would take place really in Manhattan. Because when people say New York City, and they're not from New York City, they only mean Manhattan, right? And so I said, but if I'm in the East River and all the islands of the East River and all the magic of the East River, right, then there's probably a lot of stuff there people don't know. And if they're talking about another part, maybe another part of New York they might talk about is Brooklyn, but they don't ever talk about Queens, which is where I'm from, unless they talk about leaving Queens, yeah? Or arriving at the airport in Queens. That's about it. And so I knew that in a way I actually had a lot of freedom because what people know about Queens is a couple jokes and 2 airports, you know? And so I found like I could actually just use real things from Queens in particular, and people would say again and again, that can't be a real thing. The biggest forest in New York is in Queens, Forest Park, right? And so it's so big that I found I could stick an entire Norwegian troll inside there and have it eating babies for 100 years. No one would know. And people would believe it, was the amazing thing. And so, so there was a pleasure in sort of like coming back to a place that people think they know and saying, but there's all these nooks and crannies to it that you don't yet know. And that felt like a way to make it fresh and maybe feel like something people hadn't read before, you know.
Did you mention that that book is going to be a TV show?
No, I
He didn't want to tell you about that. Look at him. The Changeling is going to be.
Yes.
I'm going to stop right there. Look,
I do appreciate you being the best hype man.
like Flavor up here. What you want?
But yes, so next fall, Apple TV, if you have Apple TV, it'll be on there. It'll be a wonderful show. Some great people made it, and it's going to be astounding.
Wait, one more thing. Tell them who's one of the stars.
Lakeith Stanfield is the lead, and he does some amazing things in there. And there's some other actors, Adina Porter, some other wonderful folks who you may not know yet, but you should know. Clark Bacco, a bunch of other people. Anyway, now to turn it around, I want to ask this question back to all of you, which is the thing I always wonder about when you do bring in the speculative is how do you pick, like how do you narrow down your magic, right? Because as you said, like you can put anything, you can imagine anything, but on a certain level, a book that has everything in it means nothing, right? So in a way, it's almost like you have to pick your magic, whether it's witches or changing one's identity or whatever it might be, or like almost like the grim magic of crime and blood and all the rest, you know. So how do you pick your magic is the question I want to ask, and how did that show up in your work?
I'm going to hop on this one and just say, you know, Mama Toni Morrison taught me everything I need to know. And so it's amazing to me that in her books, she has magic that's either very present or almost hidden. So like for example, I reread Song of Solomon last year, and I forgot that there's this one scene where Milkman goes like the forest, like, and he meets this witch in this old mansion. And like, this is actually like Circe the witch. She's named Circe.
Yes.
Circe in there. So like that taught me a lot as a young person. When I wrote We Cast a Shadow, my first novel, my magical sort of frame in that was thinking about Handmaid's Tale. So in Handmaid's Tale, Atwood said that she didn't want to use anything that didn't exist in the real world. Right. So all these restrictions on women that existed throughout time and space, and including in the present, she just put it into like one place and time. So in my book, We Cast a Shadow, you have a black male lawyer in a futuristic New Orleans who has decided to protect his black child by making his child appear to be white. Because he has a dark birthmark that's getting bigger, and he's like, I can't let these cops and everybody mess with my kid. And so I'm thinking, all right, so what exists in the real world? Well, there's skin lightening cream. There's genetic treatments. And of course, there's just all these things we do to each other, like, you know, perm your hair or talk a certain kind of way, dress a certain kind of way, you know, no hoodies, no baseball caps, that kind of stuff. So I'm just bringing in things from all across the culture and in other cultures to make this sort of point, if you will. And what's weird about it is people will read the book and they'll go, I had no idea. Now, I would say, you know, not be like, you know, about it. If you had no idea, you weren't paying attention. But once you sort of have these things revealed to you, you see it everywhere constantly. And so I just see, you know, some of my writing is like on a map where there's like a little key at the bottom part, and that tells you like where things are in the world. And with the magic, I'm trying to use the spells to bring out the truth of what's on the map, the best I can. So that's kind of how I work with that.
So for me, I just finished a young adult time travel book. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure was once you set the rules of your world, then you have to work within those parameters. And so you like you said, you can't make it just, can't be like in the book, it's a young man gets a cell phone that is actually a time machine and sends it back to 1997 in Philadelphia when the Roots are forming. And so you can't make the phone or the situation just completely magic, like it didn't do anything.
Right.
Because then there's no risk, there's no consequences, there's no tension. And so you have to set up things. So like, okay, like you were saying, use things in the real world. When the phone runs out of charge, it doesn't work anymore. You get stuck. Or if you drop it and crack it, it ain't gonna work right. And so so things like that happen in the real world, you just turn it up to 11 when you're doing something speculative. Right. And so in the real world, if your phone dies, you know, it runs out of charge, oh well, somebody can't get in touch with you for a while. In this book, if it runs out of charge, you're stuck in 1997. You can't get home. And so when the book, like again, when the phone cracks, in the real world, it's like, oh, your screen comes in fuzzy. In this world, it creates time vortexes. And so you just take stuff, like you said, from the real world, turn it up to 11, but you have to work within the rules of the world that you set up. I hate a book or a movie or anything that does that, you know, do Ex Machina thing where it's like, oh, they just showed up just in time with the exact thing that they needed. What a surprise, I'm so shocked. And so you don't want to do that, you know. And so like, it's like, you know, not to pick on Mr. Tolkien, but it's like the Eagles at the end. Like,
He rolling his grapes.
and I've read all the explanations why they didn't fly to Mordor on the Eagles in the first place. I don't believe it, because I'm gonna tell you, if my big ass was told to take a ring to Mordor and there's a giant eagle, you best believe I'm jumping on that joker. Gonna make a saddle. Giddy up. Let's go. Vamonos. So it's like you definitely have to work within the rules of the world that you've set up.
For sure.
I just need a beat for a second on that. Because you're right. They should have just gone on, yeah. But that's not the time to talk about the Eagles and Lord of the Rings. So, in my novel, I was really struggling to get into it because at first, I had read this folktale, and the idea was that an older woman had cursed a younger woman to spit pins, and I was really fixated on this idea from this folktale. But then if you try to write a novel that has someone for 200 pages spitting pins, it's too gross. No one wants to read that book, and I realized pretty quickly there's only so many ways that you can say someone is spitting pins before you get very tired of trying to figure out like new and inventive ways or figure things out. And so I did the thing that you all have to do as writers that you're probably used to is, why am I interested in this? What am I trying to talk about? And I realized I was thinking a lot, both on a personal level, about how many times I've been asked to conform as a woman, and especially as a Black woman who grew up in a very predominantly white community, in how much conformity was meant to be like a certain type of woman, to be safe. And I was also thinking a lot about power, and one of the easiest ways to get people to think about power, and also how women can both have power but still be exiled for it, as witches. So sometimes you do take the cliche or the trope and then build it into the thing that you're writing. And then from there, I have a really hard time with the idea of how most stories about magic work, because it's always a chosen one. You don't need anybody else. It tells you that if you have power, you can be number one, and you can just keep accumulating it, and you're special. So in my book, I really wanted to think about what does magic look like if you have to use it as a community? What happens if everyone in the book who wants to do magic they're challenged to work together to build something beautiful? And how much I wanted to say something along those lines, and also to find a way that doesn't feel too earnest or too cheesy, even though we should all want to build beautiful things because that's what makes life worth living. But if you just write that, then your book's over, so you have to find different ways to get in there. And I think that's what really helped me shape my whole novel, is to figure out a way to do those things.
Nice. And for myself, for the last novel, the thing I tried to write, I wrote the novel within a year or two of my wife giving birth to our first son. And the sort of truth at the heart of the novel is that sometimes, I'm not saying for everybody, but like you fall in love with somebody, you love them so much that you decide to have a child together, But then having that child together can be the thing that makes you forget each other because you're working so hard just to take care of this thing, right? Till where you might look up at a certain point, say 6 months in, 9 months in, a year in, 2 years in, and you've stopped being a married couple and you've instead become co-owners of a small business, right? And you're trying to just keep this business running, and it can be very easy to forget all the good things about that person who you loved enough to make a child with. And I felt like that was a hard truth that on some level maybe seems obvious to a lot of people after they're married and have children, but in a way I thought it was a secret that had been kept from me in the way that maybe sometimes a parent thinks I'm doing a child a favor by not telling them a hard truth. But in fact, maybe a child would be better prepared for the hard truth if they were told it, you know? And so then I figured like that helped me figure out the fairy tale I wanted to tell, which was the fairy tale that marriage, like, you know, first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes the baby in the baby carriage. And for my book, the idea was like, and then what happens right after that? And what comes right after that is exhaustion, frustration, bitterness, separation. And then that was super depressing for the start of the book. So I said, that can't be where the book ends. So I said, maybe the fairy tale journey of my book is how two people come apart and then have to work and fight really hard to get back together and figure out how to fall in love with each other again, with this third being there. And then the fairy tale type that felt like the most useful for that was the changeling fairy tale, right? Because that's all about the idea that a child comes into one's life, but it is not a child that you can love, and it causes problems within a family, and everything falls apart because it's actually not a human baby and all the rest. And that really helped me to focus in on what I would keep coming back to, which is just like, this is hard to do. And if you put in that work, maybe you can do it. It's not even a guarantee, right? And so I would just say as a side note, my wife and I are both here with our 2 kids. So far it's going good, you know. But that was like a central idea for me as well. So then here's a follow-up question to that question, which is, okay, each of you talked about like how you found or how you focused on the magic of the thing. How do you decide what's the real stuff, right? Like what matters in the real world that you add to that you ally to that you use alongside that, like of all the reality you might use?
Yeah, I'll answer that real quick. I think the real stuff is what helps ground it, you know? It's what helps make it, like I said, palatable, relatable to folks. You know, Stephen King, you know, you read Salem's Lot, and there's this really scary part at the beginning of Salem's Lot, but the next 100 pages are describing this town.
Yeah.
You know, these PTA moms who are wine drunk, and these, you know, no offense, so, you know, do you?
Nobody out there is wine drunk.
Yeah.
Clearly not.
But, you know, you find this small town, Salem's Lot, and it's got everybody. I grew up in a small town. I know those people. I know the sheriff. I know the real estate agent. I know the people that live on the outside edge of town. And so what that does is when the vampires show up, and it takes a while, if you haven't read Salem's Lot, it's incredible. It takes a while on Salem's Lot for the vampires to show up. By the time the vampires show up, you realize the people are really the real monsters. You know, the vampire's bad, don't get me wrong, it's not great, but these people ain't great either. So, yeah. And so what happens is by grounding it like that, by creating this sort of concreteness, right? By the time the speculative or the action, or whatever you want to call it, happens, you are in that world and you can then, again, suspend your disbelief and go along with it. And so for me, and that's whether you're writing horror or fantasy or sci-fi or magic realism, you still have to ground it in something. You have to build that foundation, and then you put that house on top of it. And then as a writer, you come and you knock that house down, and it falls in on people, and then you see how they crawl out of the rubble. So.
I think to be a writer, or at least to be one who wants to be a good writer, you have to love people. You also have to hate people, too, so that you see the best of them and the worst of them. because that's one of the other like big thrills of fiction. If it's what it's like to be alive and you're catching at least even a 10% of life, then you have this complex, interesting person at the heart of your work. And it doesn't matter if there's witches or if they might turn into a vampire, but you feel it with them. You follow them on the journey, and that's what makes it exciting. I've never been able to get into any of my works until I know the person at the heart of it.
Yeah, I totally agree with what everybody's saying here. I mean, for me, it's the characters and their relationships and their personalities, and it's also how the place that they're from shapes who they are. So I met somebody in the audience a few minutes ago before we started, and I mentioned New Orleans, and she said something I thought was very wise and true. She said, New Orleans is this sort of yin-yang of like heartbreak and joy. On the one hand, I think Louisiana is like 49th in terms of like wealth in the nation, so there's never quite enough money.
Yeah.
It's the kind of state and the kind of city where you can have your best night of your life as a tourist or as a local, and the worst night in the same night, basically.
Yeah.
And so, in my short story collection, The Ones in the City Love You, it's 19 stories, and my rule was make sure it's in the city limits, it's all African-American characters, and it's thinking about how, like, the characters who having like the worst night of their life, the city doesn't quite forget them, or like it doesn't forsake them. So if you're on the streets and starving in New Orleans, like it's almost a joke. They'll just hand you a bowl of gumbo. Hey, you look hungry, kid. Here, have some gumbo. The flip side is, maybe you have had a great career. You're involved in business or politics, and because of corruption or whatever, like the system just kind of comes in, and it's that sort of, it's Chinatown effect. Like, why is it happening to so and so? Well, it's New Orleans. Those kind of things happen constantly. And so, in my city, the realness is how do you deal with that? I think it's the reason why a lot of my characters are kind of, I won't say con artists, but they're like sort of like running a game to survive constantly in a lot of the stories. Because if you play it straight up, they'll get you. If you play it totally crooked, they'll get you also. So somewhere in the middle is the sort of truth of how to survive in a city like a New Orleans or like a Santo Domingo or a Sao Paulo. There's these sort of global cities that have a sort of similar foundation to them, and New Orleans is very much part of that same situation. So the realness is just in the heart of the characters and how they refuse to be bowed by circumstance, and how they will always love each other regardless of what the world is saying about them and about their lives.
Just as a heads up to everybody, I think in about 10 minutes we're going to open up to Q&A, just to let you all know so you can start bubbling those questions in your mind now in case they come up. So I want, this is, speaking of that, like grounding in reality, I'm like selfishly, I know different writers have different opinions about this, where they say like, I don't care what the real life story is, I only care about the book, and I don't want to know the writer's background and how they came up with their story, and I don't feel like that at all. I love hearing about how or why people came up with the books they came up with, like what grounded it, where it came from and all the rest, and I feel like we've been talking about that to some degree. And Megan and I were talking about that right before, that it's a question I always love asking. And so I want to ask it, like, as much as you're willing to say, like, do the books come completely from whatever the imagination is, whatever that means? Do they come from like, oh, there was this one incident, or this is my mother and I'm writing about her, whatever it is? What would you say?
I mean, I'll just say I'm a former corporate lawyer, and yeah, I see out there some laughs. And I mean, what you get being a corporate lawyer, I think being a lawyer in general is that you're seeing people in this kind of petri dish. And you're seeing like this sort of best behavior and worst behavior, again, all at the same time, constantly. And so even though like in my heart, I'm a literary writer, people tend to say that my plots tend to move. So I'm always just thinking like, all right, what's the next crazy thing this person's gonna do in a situation in which they think they're entitled to what they're entitled to? And so I have this one story called Ghetto University. It's about an English professor who gets fired because of budget cuts. And he's wandering through the French Quarter one day, and he's like a sort of like preppy guy, kind of like Carlton from Fresh Prince. And he puts on a hoodie because he's cold, and he hates hoodies because he's seen a certain kind of way. And so, of course, in the French Quarter, the tourists think, oh, that guy's gonna rob me because he's black, and they just start throwing money at him. So in the story, he has no gun, no weapon. He's not even like asking for money, but they think he's a robber. And so in that story, how do you keep on like rationing that up? Like bring it to the next level? Well, of course, at some point, he's walking around the French Quarter, and he's like pockets full of money, and he sees this lady who he thinks is a sex worker, but it turns out it's actually his wife, who's a chemist who was also trying to get money to pay for their rent. But she was putting on like this mask and like gassing guys in hotel rooms to get their credit cards. So it's kind of like, what I'm trying to say is this. What I'm trying to say is, like, being a lawyer, I've seen, it's like everything. Last thing I'll say on this point is that, like, being, you know, I'm a black man from New Orleans. I grew up in New Orleans East. New Orleans is a very segregated city in a lot of ways. And so had I not become a lawyer, I mean, my community is like 99% black, like my part of New Orleans. You know, black church, black supermarket, black school, you know, everything. Black bowling alley, black milkman, right? When I became a lawyer, I started seeing the other part of my community. And so as a result of that, kind of like detectives in detective novels, I could see all the various layers of the cake. So I could like go to Mardi Gras and see like the Zulu Mardi Gras Indians, and then go over here and like see like the Rex, like the guy with like his crown who thinks he's like the boss of the entire city, that kind of stuff. And the reality of it is that there's a constant like tension and sparks that's hopping off of the city constantly. And to be inside of it is fascinating. And being a lawyer has given me this sort of 360-degree view of what the city really is. And I feel very lucky to be from a city like New Orleans.
I think, first of all, don't go on a double date night with Maurice.
We won't hurt anybody.
You're going to get gassed, and then also you have people throwing money at you, which ain't that bad. No, for me, I think my fiction, my writing comes from a place of sometimes great anger and rage. You know, I like to say I write because it's illegal to kill people in certain circumstances. But I think also it is I think a lot of times writing is a confession of pain. And so the characters I tend to write about are people from like Maurice, my neighborhood. I'm from a small town in Virginia called Matthews, Virginia. It's 8,000 people, and I know all of them. And so I feel like their stories haven't been told. Real quick, so when I first started writing, I wrote a book called My Darkest Prayer, and it got rejected 63 times. Like, everybody rejected it. And I used to get the 3/4 rejection letter. We love the dialogue. We love the story. We like the characters. We don't know how to sell it, though, so good luck in your future endeavors. And so the stories I want to tell are about my uncles, about my aunts, about the people I grew up with in this small town, you know. And I remember when one of the people that rejected it said, "Oh man, I can't believe all this violence and murder and sex is happening in a small town." I was like, "Cause you didn't grow up in one." It's like, it's Friday night, ain't nothing to do. It's like, and so, you know, for me, my writing is very personal. It's very cathartic. Black Hot Wasteland is dedicated to my father. You know, Razorblade Tears is dedicated to my mother. And both of them were incredibly intense individuals and personalities, and I really felt like nobody was talking about black rural Southerners in a modern sense. I mean, there are writers like that. Don't get me wrong. The great Jessamine Ward is incredible. You know, and Ada Kalak was writing some of that. But my specific part of the world, there's, you know, it's like, you know, it's David Baldacci, and that's all Northern Virginia. That's where all the money at. You know, it's like, and somebody said something to me the other day that, or just earlier today, that I write about really dark, gritty, you know, stuff. And I said, well, that's where all the best stories are. You know, it's down in the gutter. It's down them dirt lanes. You know, it's like, you know, one last thing I'll say. I think there's this idea, especially when you write about Southern rural stuff, that it's not as intense as, say, a more urban or more metropolitan story. You know, and I've been to New York City. You know, a dark alley in New York City is creepy and it's scary. But to me, for my money, there's no scarier place in the world than a dirt lane in the middle of a small town at night, and all you can see is headlights coming towards you.
That sun already went down.
Exactly. So, so for me, that's where my stories come from. It's this idea that nobody's talking about my part of the world. You know, I always say, you know, Virginia is my heart and my home. And to paraphrase James Baldwin, I love it, but because I love it, I reserve the right to criticize it. Sure. So.
I think that double date's about what and what.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a risk here because maybe this won't be my third book. But the last time, this was March of last year, I was in New Orleans. I should have seen you, but I didn't.
And it was Jamie, by the way. I had to think for a second. It was Jamie, totally.
Yeah. We know all the same people. And I was in a Lyft, and the Lyft driver, she started talking to me, and at first it was just like a normal conversation. I'm pretty chit-chatty when I'm in a lift because, I don't know, it's awkward to have someone you don't know drive you, so you start peppering them with questions, and they hope you go away faster. But she reversed it on me, and then she started talking to me about things about my life that there was no way she could have known. And she started saying to me, a spirit is moving through me. A spirit is trying to communicate with you. And our talk got more and more emotional. It was about just a 10-minute drive, but I started crying during the trip because it was such a strange thing. And then she said more things about how I should be living my life, and it's still an experience that I'm trying to figure out. And after the ride was over, we got out of the lift together, and she hugged me, and we were crying. And then a man was like, do you all know each other? And I was like, no, that's just how the ride went. But that's my third book. I keep thinking about the ways now that people say the spirit moves through you. And I think the only other thing is one of my good friends was there, and I told her about it. And they live in New Orleans. And they said, so your driver was a black woman, right? And I said, uh-huh. And they were so pleased because that's also the book. It's the ways that maybe we see our spirits within one another. But maybe that's not the book because that's how writing goes.
Wow.
So basically, Maurice LaValle picked you up and drove you around.
Yeah. I can't think of a better way for us to end the conversation part of this than that. So let's have a round of applause before we go into Q&A.
We have about 15 minutes. Please stand if you have a question. We will bring the microphone to you. I'm bringing a mic.
Behind you, quick.
Right, here I come.
Oh,
It's working. Okay. This is for Megan.
Hi.
Hi. In both of your books, I was really interested in the relationship with the mothers and daughters. And so I thought maybe you can just talk about that a little bit and kind of share if that was like intentional to explore that in both or just happened or, yeah.
Well, I think everybody has things to say about their mothers, first of all. But I do think that I am still thinking a lot about, I think a crucial question of being a person growing up is when you see your parents as people, when you see them as fallible, and when you see them as having also an availability to you. Where my first book, I think everything could have been solved if the mother and daughter had sat down and had a real conversation with one another. But I also think that's like the heart of how we live sometimes, is that most of our problems would be settled if we could just sit down and say, this is what's going on, tell me the truth. And the other person wholeheartedly says, this is the truth, and you believe them. And then we would never write books because we're all fully actualized and we have great conversations with one another. And then, especially with the second book, The Woman Could Fly. Also, thank you for reading both of my books. Wow. Let's talk afterwards. It was a lot about that idea of you have to let your mother be imperfect to be an adult. And I think that it's really hard for a lot of us to grasp that you have to see the people in your life fully, to love them, to accept them, and to also know that sometimes the things that you want, they can't give you. And it's that double-edged sword of loving someone. Thank you for the question.
I'll jump on it real quick. My mom, I wrote the mother. Anybody that's read Blacktop Wasteland know the mother in Blacktop Wasteland is a tough woman to love.
Yeah.
And my mom listened to the audiobook, and she was like, is that supposed to be me? And I was like, no, not at all. That's not you.
But was it really?
It was her. But I think sometimes we write books to have conversations with the people in our lives that we couldn't have in real life. And so that definitely was a conversation I was having, and my mom's passed on now, but that definitely was a conversation I needed to have with her that I couldn't have one-on-one. And so I sort of used that book as a catharsis to talk to her in a way. As the man, as Beauregard says in the book, his mother can be mean, but that's still his mama. And to quote another great movie or book, Russell Crowe says in 3:10 to Yuma, even bad men love their mamas.
It's true. I have a story in my collection. It starts off with the mother telling the son, he's like 10 years old. She says, look, I'm gonna give you $5 for every bottle of whiskey you find hidden around this apartment. Because it's her bottle, so she's trying to get clean, basically, right? And so that happens. And then at some point, she's driving the car downtown, they're together, and then the car gets towed, and all these crazy things are happening. And I remember I was so afraid to give that story to my mother because she is a firebrand who's like this crazy, crazy life. And so I finally give it to her, and I'm sitting there, never do this. I watched her read it. I'm sitting there watching her read the story, and her eyebrows kind of go up and down like that. She's looking sideways. And then she gets to the last page, closes the manuscript up, and she just goes, that car was silver, not blue. And that's all she said. And I was so grateful for that.
Hi, thank you all so much for sharing about your personal lives. I think it's such a cool experience to get to hear about like the people that you are and maybe what informs your writing. And I wonder how much of your kind of lived experience you bring to the page versus how much of a kind of social political commentary that you're trying to make when you're writing about kind of the science fiction or Afrofuturism or the future that we're trying to live our way into. How much of what you're saying is layering a critique versus also holding the hope of what we want to live into?
I love the way that you phrase the future we want to live in. I think one of the things that happens, or at least it's happened for me as a writer, is that when you start researching issues, Lakewood was in some ways about medical experimentation, and one of the things that you learn a lot about is that the issues that we're talking about now, I'm going to say this because I feel like some of you in the crowd are going to be like, no, duh, because you're much older than me. But once you hit a certain age and once you start doing research, you realize that the issues that we're talking about now, every 20 years, they keep coming back up. And we take a step forward, maybe even two if we're lucky. Then we take another half step back. And then we keep doing this dance throughout our lives. And so you find out that you're bringing things from the past into the present again in a slightly different way. But you're also thinking really deeply about how do we progress from now? How do we, when people read this, God, you hope people will read 50 years later, and they'll say, oh my God, people were talking about this then. Because that's the other thing about being a person. We're so short-sighted in some ways, or we don't have the time to keep thinking about the ways that we keep bringing things forward.
Yeah, this problem of race in America. So I remember when I read Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, and I remember thinking, as a young black man, wow, this is really feels like. And I remember thinking about my father who, he's a lot like that protagonist. He wants to live the American dream, as himself. And so I feel like we often have these moments in our reality where we kind of go, oh, we fixed the race problem. Remember 2008, 2009? Getting Obama, getting your boy Obama, right? Your boy Obama, right? It's like we didn't fix the race problem, right?
I call him Barry, but you go ahead, that's cool.
My bad, Barry. But you go like the 1960s, and you have people being like, yo, they have like the horn rim glasses and the fro, and like we fixed the race problem. You go back to like the 50s with the petticoats and the crinolines, we fixed the race problem. We keep saying the same thing over and over again, and you have to ask why that's the case. And I just think that for my stories, this idea of like you have to love your characters, hate your characters. I've written stories where I kind of hated my characters, and I'd like just throw dump trucks at them and see how they respond to it. But as the writer of X-Men, Chris Claremont, he's like the guy who was doing it in the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yeah.
He would always say, it doesn't matter how it gets, there's a sense of hope. And I just think that for me, like my ancestors, with all of the love they've given me through the talks, like direct to my face, or through the music, through the food, through the history, through the knowledge, I can never feel like it's going to be over. I just feel like we're going to win somehow. And I put that in the stories.
I think for me, like whatever I'm writing, whether it's crime fiction, science fiction, horror, I've written a couple horror stories and stuff. It's always, the honey is the plot, is the story, and then the medicine is the subtext, And so, like with Razorblade Tears, the honey is this sort of really badass Southern revenge novel about these two hard ex-cons who are getting revenge for their murdered sons. But the medicine is talking about homophobia, talking about toxic masculinity, talking about that in the South and specifically within the black community. And so for me, that was a big part of it as far as writing that book, was I really wanted, I felt like as a writer, if I'm not having the hard conversations, then what am I doing? Right. I could write Blacktop Waste, and I love that book. I could write that book 25 times. Yeah. But if I'm not pushing myself as an artist, but also if I'm not pushing myself as a person to really discuss those things, then what am I doing? Like for Razorblade Tears, I have a cousin, and we're the same age, and he's gay, and we've all known. Like my daddy had 11 brothers and sisters, so I got a bunch of cousins, and so we all knew. Nobody cared. And so finally, a few years ago, he came up, and he was going to tell my aunt and uncle that he was gay, and that his roommate was actually his husband, and it didn't go well. My aunt and uncle did not appreciate it. And I remember me and my brother took him out for a beer, and he said something that struck me, and I thought about it for 3 years before I wrote the book. He said, maybe I should have just kept it to myself. And the idea of that was so disturbing to me because, I put a lot of gray hairs on my mom's head when I was younger, but I never felt like she didn't love me for who I was. And if the people that are supposed to love you unconditionally don't, then what does that say about them? Not what it says about you. And so that's where the book came from. And I think also within the black community, there's a hard conversation that has to be had about homophobia and about the way we interact with that and intersect with that. And, it's one of those things where I think if you're not examining the truth, or you're not examining those problems, then you're wasting your talent,
Couldn't agree more. I mean, oh my goodness, yeah. I have a story called Rhinoceros that's in my collection, and I remember like I'm not in that book. Like there's no black lawyers in that book at all. In that story, the two main characters, it's a trans young woman. She's like 18 years old, and a non-binary character. And I really want to do a close-up and think about the people in my life I've known, who had those characteristics, and just let them have the stage to themselves and show that sort of love. Because if you feel like your own mother doesn't love you, there's almost no hope for you, right?
Exactly.
So how do you fight your way out of that box that you're in? So yeah.
I mean, I can't add to that.
Come on, Vic, tell us.
I mean, the only thing I would add maybe is just that all of that, I think, does mean even more, to speak of the other part of that question, the personal part of it, it means that much more, I do think, when it's grounded in people who you believe in, right? Otherwise, they just become types who are moving through a story in order to teach a lesson or blah, blah, blah. But if they're real people who are maybe sometimes also the source of the problem, right? Like I think early on in my own writing, when I was a very young writer, I wrote good people or perfect people who were wronged by the world, and then they went out and didn't understand why the world wronged them, and the stories were inert and dull and all the rest. And as I started to learn that, I harm people every day with selfishness, short-sightedness, all the other things. If I let the main character be like that, then people actually identify, hopefully, with that, and then they see that person go through these deeper, larger political and social ideas, then it feels like a person has gone through that versus a lesson has been taught. And then, when those two things come together, it feels like the best of all of it,
Yeah.
We have a question from one of the greats over here, I think.
About that. So first, thank you all just for this conversation and also for your work. And I think it was Megan that said something about play. Was that? Okay.
Yeah.
Can each of you talk, and you too, Victor, talk about the role of play in your work, either a moment or if it's just a part of your process in general? I would really appreciate that.
All right, so I'm gonna go first this time then.
Oh.
The challenge, yes. So the only thing I can say about play is, so I had, my first 2 books were literary realism, very much based on my own life. So I wrote, the first book is a book of stories about growing up in Queens, all the Black and Latino kids whose parents were working all the time, and so they raised themselves, and all the bad things that happen when children raise themselves. And then the second novel was about a kid who goes to college, who has a mental breakdown in college and has to return home. And by that point, I had essentially written myself all the way to my graduate life. And the choice I had then was I could write a book about a kid who goes to an MFA program and writes a book about writing short stories.
It's very
and I
Charlie
didn't want to
Kaufman.
do that to anybody in this world. But what I also found was I was really miserable when I was writing, and I realized it was partly because when I looked at my first 2 books, I think I had bought into the idea that the way one is a serious writer is that you are a miserable writer. Right? And that you write only about the bad things that people do and how there's no hope in the world and all the rest. And so when I was getting ready to write my 3rd book, I was kind of like, it's not making me rich, it's not making me famous. It should at least make me happy.
Mm-hmm.
It should at least bring me some joy. And I said to myself, what would be the thing that would bring me joy if I put it in a book? And immediately, I heard myself say, monsters. If I put a monster in this next book, my life will be good. Whatever happens with the book, my life will be better. And I haven't looked back since. Like every book since has a monster of some kind in it, whether it's real, like human or speculative monster or anything. And I have never been happier with every single book I've written, as long as there's something monstrous.
I mean, look, Big Machine changed my life, and I don't even write monsters in my books. I'm curious, though, out there, who writes? Raise your hand if you write. I see some hands. All right, good. Look, I always say this when I'm like teaching and doing like conferences and stuff. And people just like, look at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, when you sit down to write, it should not be painful. When you sit down to write, you should have a good time. Okay? I used to, as a corporate lawyer, I would have to write these briefs, like these 60, 100-page, 500-page briefs. I was getting paid 6 figures, so it was doing me good financially, and I almost hated almost every single one, right? In my Substack, I often write about this feeling of playfulness and joy, this feeling that you should feel better getting up from the table than you did sitting down at the table. Because when you're having a good time, people are going to be able to tell you're having a good time. And, you know, yes, there are the cliches of like, you know, certain writers like drunk themselves to death, like live in these little French garrets, you know, freezing their butts off and that kind of stuff. But when it comes down to it, from a psychological perspective, if you like doing something, you keep doing it. If you don't like doing something, you probably won't be able to keep doing it. So just figure out what makes you happy. If you want monsters or zombies or, you know, people in, you know, out in rural areas with shotguns and on dark, dusty roads shooting each other and that kind of stuff, or, you know, whatever the thing is you're working on, witches, just put it in there and then let the market see who you are. There are readers out there for whoever you are. But if you like write this stuff that you yourself don't like, it makes you feel bad, they're gonna go, you're not Sartre. You're not like, you know, writing these sort of French books and it's like, you know, life sucks and no. This is America. This is America. You know, we're very hopeful people here in this country for the most part, right? Even with all other problems. So just have a good time, you know, be joyful and spread that to other writers, because I think a lot of writers feel sort of suppressed by their own sadness, and it should not be the case at all.
Yeah, I agree with that. So to answer your question, Deisha, I'll tell a real quick story. So back in 2015, I got an agent. I wrote a couple short stories in this magazine, got picked up by an agent, wrote a book that I really didn't like. The agent had all these suggestions about how I should write the book and what the book should be about. And it was a competent book, but like Victor was saying, it had no life to it, you know? It was like, it's the difference between driving a minivan and driving a 67 Chevelle. Both of them will get you there, but one is way more fun. And so, and I had got, the agent dropped me, the book got rejected, nobody wanted it. And I was watching an American Masters episode with Bruce Springsteen. And he was talking about when he wrote Born to Run. He had had 2 flops in MCA, and he knew they were going to cut him. And so he was like, you know what? I'm just not going to try to be the next Dylan. I'm not going to try to be, the next, Dan Fogelberg or whatever. I'm going to go and I'm going to write about what I want to write about. He said, I want to write about girls and cars and growing up in Asbury Park and what it feels like to be a young man not knowing who you are. And I saw that episode, it was on PBS. And I remember sitting and I wasn't married to my wife yet. And we were just dating. And I turned to her, I said, you know what? I'm going to write about White Lightning and Gator and Burt Reynolds, except it's going to be a black man, and it's going to be cars and shotguns and people going to shot houses in the woods, that sell moonshine by the cup. I'm going to put everything that I grew up with, that I love, that I like, into this book because I had nothing to lose. I had nothing to lose. And I have never thought that other people were going to like it. I wrote it because I liked it. And then other people liked it, and I was pleasantly surprised. But I think that's the main thing. I think you do have to write for yourself first, and you have to, like Maurice was saying, you have to enjoy it. I've had a bunch of jobs other than being a writer. I hated them all. I hated every one of them. I was a retail manager. I was a bouncer, all that kind of stuff. The only thing that has made me feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing is writing. I remember my mom. She passed away last year, and she was in hospice. And I got the advance copies for one of my books, and I went to see her. And I was kind of nervous because this book was different than my other 2 books. And I remember her telling me, she said, well, here's the thing. I didn't want you to be a writer because I didn't think you were going to make no money. That was her first concern. It's like, I want you to be able to afford your bills and pay bills and stuff. She said, but birds got to sing and bees got to sting, and you got to write. And so I think that's what you got to do.
I love that.
Why do I have to keep going after you?
It's a setup.
Exactly.
To be a little less poignant about it, when I went to my MFA, I was lucky enough to study with Ross Gay, and one of the first things Ross said to me, I don't know if any of you have met Ross, but he's a character, but he was like, you're going to be funny, you're going to write like you're dancing, and you're going to have fun. We're going to play for all of these 3 years, and when you leave, you're going to make the things that you actually want to make.
Wow.
And having someone just sit you down, I wasn't even in the program yet. He took me out for coffee trying to convince me, and I knew immediately after he said that, I was going to Indiana. It didn't matter if Indiana, I had a lot of thoughts about it. I was going to Indiana because he had promised me so quickly, you're going to be the type of writer who actually has fun, and so you'll have a career, because nothing's guaranteed. No one promises you anything as writers. But when someone says you can have fun and you can be yourself and you can have pleasure, that's the best thing someone can offer you when you have an opportunity. And I'm always going to be grateful to him for starting my relationship with academia like that.
Look, last thought on that. In my first book, We Cast a Shadow, because that idea of things that only I love, I counted. That book has 472 Easter eggs. If anybody ever finds all those Easter eggs, there's a very special gift waiting for the person who figures that out. Like some MA student, like some PhD English student will find them all. But anyway, all right.
On that note, I think we are at time. Thank you all so much for hanging out with us.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we're going to have a book.